Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? All right, excellent. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Alan Regala. I am the creator of Happier Spaces and director of client happiness for ShelfGenie here in Seattle. All of you guys are here for one reason or another, and so the first thing I would love to do is to take a quick poll. And I would like to kind of see where people are at, why they're here, so I can try to do my best to custom tailor this for you. So I kind of have 3 different buckets, and I would like you to raise your hand if you fall into one of these buckets. Thank you, sir. First one is people that are the very early stages and thinking about doing a project like a remodel, a renovation of either the kitchen or their whole home, something like that. All right, great. So very early stages. People that are maybe in the middle of the process that are already doing some sort of renovation. Okay, a few of you here. And then anyone who is maybe more recently, maybe the last few years, actually done a renovation to say their kitchen, but they're still looking for maybe a few more upgrades or something like that. Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. So we're going to make sure that this has really relevant information for all of you guys here. In particular, those in the early stages, which is the majority of you here, you're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. Maybe you're putting in a brand new kitchen with new cabinets. Are you changing your layout? Is it the same layout? How do you make your space more efficient? I've never had anyone ever say to me, well, I just have way too much space. I'm sorry, but I need you to take away some space because I need less space. So people are oftentimes looking to get more efficient, especially if you live kind of in the city or you've downsized recently or anything like that. And also making the space really accessible. So it's not just about putting as much in the cabinet as you can, but you also want to make sure that you can actually get to everything, because it's really pointless to have a cabinet full of stuff if you can only get to that first 6 inches of the space. So as I mentioned, my goal for you guys here is I really want you to come away with some information that by the time we're done, you feel more aware of what's possible. Really, at the end of the day, that's my goal. So you're aware of the possibilities, so you have, maybe it can help direct you in your path for renovation. So, this is where you're at right now. If you're thinking about remodeling or renovating or fixing up what you have, either way, you're here. There's a reason you're here. Is you're probably not happy with your space and you want to do something, and you're trying to get to here, right? And as I mentioned, for my goal with you guys here is to let you know at least a little bit of what you don't know. And this is what we find in the case when we are going into people's homes and trying to make their space better, and is that people don't know that this is possible over on this side, but this is what they want, and they tell us when we get there, yeah, I just need a couple pull-out shelves here or there, and really this is what's possible. They just don't know it yet. So I'm going to show you a lot of pictures and go through a lot of examples to help you kind of build that awareness. And through great design, this is where a lot of it is at, in my opinion, is coming up with a really great design first, being aware of what's possible, working with someone who's knowledgeable, incorporating great product as well, and then you get great results. So just want to show you a few examples again of kind of what we do here. This is a very typical space for us. Maybe some of you have. Do any of you have a little closet like this that you use as a pantry? A little drywall space with the wire shelving inside. Very common, especially in newer homes. They'll just put some wire shelving at this stock spacing here, 14 inches or whatever it might be. But very standard. And what we like to do is make a space more efficient and accessible. So bring you that joy. And you can see here we're using more of that space. You're able to actually get to everything in there, and at the end of the day, you're just happier. We, ShelfGenie, custom design storage solutions for existing cabinets and pantries. We do a lot of bathrooms and other spaces as well. But the key for us is that we don't actually build cabinets. We just work on the interiors to make those really effective for you. And we do brand new cabinets. Once you've done a remodel, you've got the cabinets in. We can kind of come in at the end, or we've done really much older homes that we just do it in the existing cabinets. This is some of our team here, and we're based here locally in Seattle. It's a national organization, but locally owned and operated. And you can Google us, you find lots of great reviews. We're been an Angie's List Super Service Award winner for the last 5-6 years, and we're great ratings on Yelp and Google and all that good stuff. All right, so now to the meat of the presentation here. So how to use the whole cabinet. Ooh, that's really loud. Stay over here. How to use the entire cabinet, the entire space that you have. That's really what we want to talk about here. Most people just aren't using their space effectively. At the end of the day, they wish they had more space, but using what you have now is probably the first place to start. And with proper design, you can typically gain 50 to 150% more usable space within what you have already. And so there's a couple different principles that I'm going to share with you. The first one is what we try to do is minimize dead space. So what you try to avoid is, you've got a nice cabinet here with lots of volume in it, but then you see this space up here. You're like, what, I could probably put something right there, right? Or there's a little bit space there, but mostly up top there. You know what, I could have another little level up there, right? And so what we try to do is, hey, let's try to minimize that kind of wasted space, and maybe we should have a third level in there, right? So, it's a good use of space. We've done this quite a bit, where even something kind of narrow like this, short, that's just spices, right? That could be really effective. And if you've got your spices sitting on your counter right now, like, oh, hey, that would be a good use of space. Clear off those countertops. The second principle is we try to minimize stacking or minimize piling of things, right? So this is a good one under the oven. If you have an oven with a little storage space under there, you got things just piled on top of each other. And it's, of course, the thing you want is it's always on the bottom there, right? You try to put what you use the most on the top, but inevitably you end up needing to get to something on the bottom, and you have to unpile that whole thing, right? It's the same with pots and pans and other items. If we go back to this picture here, you're like, hey, you know what, I could put more pans on top of these pans. And you could, and that would utilize that space and eliminate the dead space, but that would still make it really hard to get to all these items underneath it. So we try to minimize the stacking. And maybe do something like this where for flatter items, for example, let's minimize those by putting them vertically, and now they're not piled on top of each other. And then the third thing is the use of a pull-out shelving. And this is really critical, whether you're using just regular drawers or inside the cabinet doing the pull-out shelves, because you can get to the back. And really that's the main function that these serve, is that you can get to the back of that space, and now you don't have to take everything in the front out of the cabinet just to get to the back. So the rest of this, we're going to go through some different examples, different types of problem items that we see, as well as different types of spaces that are problematic for a lot of folks. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hands. I'll have an opportunity at the end to answer questions, but feel free to raise your hand if you have anything in the meantime. So pots and pans. This is one that we hear probably the most. Hey, I have pots and pans. It's awful getting to the back of my cabinet. I don't know what's back there. And this is pretty typical. Again, just kind of two normal shelves in a cabinet like this. For this particular client, a couple things I'll note here. So one, I like to keep the lids on top of the pots. I don't know about you, but I don't like searching for lids all over the place. So we keep the lids on here, and instead of having, when we can anyway, so you can see there's a couple up here, but if we invert the lids, we save a couple inches of space there, and we have multiple levels. Instead of putting pots inside of pots inside of pots and stacking pans on pans and pans, we just use multiple levels, and it just makes everything a lot easier to get to. That's just one option for pots and pans. Spices, there's a lot of different options for spices. This is what we see the most of. When you open up that upper cabinet, maybe next to your cooktop, and you've got you've got something which is like, this person has one of those little tiered things that you get from the Container Store or wherever, which isn't a great use of space anyways, because you waste all the space underneath those things. But inevitably, unless those little risers are taller than the spice container itself, you inevitably end up knocking the one in front of it over, and you've got spices on your head, and it's just not a great situation. So there's a couple of ways to account for spices. One is very simple, a door rack. So and this is something you can get online. You can get at a one of those like store bowls or Container Store, a place like that, organization place. This is a really simple one. And it's very effective. You know, you can have some spices on the door in your cabinet or even a pantry door or wherever. This is one solution that works really well. Also, this one is called a spice tower. This is one that we custom build. And the idea here is that you see over here, we end up not having spices, layers of spices, one in front of the other. Instead, you've got a single row, and then you've got multiple heights, you know, on top of each other like this. And these all pull out, and those shelves are adjustable, so you can have different height containers and whatnot. This is a great use of space here, and everything's super easy to get to. But not everybody has that option, let's say, in an upper cabinet. So sometimes people have a really narrow cabinet down below. This is a great option for those narrow cabinets. Not a whole lot you can do with those spaces. Or as I showed before, you know, just a little narrow space above, you know, in a lower cabinet. If you've got enough space, you can sneak that in there. And you only need, you know, maybe 4 inches or so, and that can work really, really well. Some people have cooktops, a drop-in range that has false fronts, so it's like a little panel that looks like it's a drawer, but there's no drawer there, and you're wondering, like, why didn't they put anything there? And then you're thinking, oh, well, maybe all the stuff behind it doesn't allow me to have a drawer there. In some cases that's true, but in a lot of cases you can actually have a drawer in there. The manufacturer of the cabinet probably didn't put one in because they don't know what kind of range you have, so you know, depending on how much space is under there, oftentimes we will put in drawers like this, and so now you've got a completely new space that you didn't have before. And oh, by the way, a lot of people ask about spices underneath the cooktop like this. All the heat is going up into the thing that you're cooking, so there's usually actually not a lot of heat underneath. So you can put spices there, but a lot of people are still uncomfortable with that. So you can also use this for cooking utensils or other smaller items as well. A lot of cabinets have what are called styles. So there are 2 types of cabinets: framed cabinets and frameless cabinets. A lot more, I'd say, modern cabinets, like IKEA type of cabinets, are frameless, where the edge of the cabinet is a panel, a vertical panel, and that actually gives you the most room. However, there are a lot of this style cabinet, which are called framed cabinets. They have a little frame around the outside, and then a lot of times will have a post that runs down the middle like this. And that post is not a structural piece. It's not there to help sustain the countertop or anything like that. Most of the time, in really wide cabinets, that may be the case, but most of the time it's not. And so what this ends up doing is just being a really big nuisance to work around. How many people have a cabinet like this with a post down the middle? Yeah, if you have a pan that's wider than this opening, you end up having to kind of turn it sideways and get it in there, or an appliance, you know, you're trying to jimmy it in there, and then it looks like this. So what we can do is we actually cut this style out, and then we attach it to one of the doors so that you have a nice big opening. So here you can see that post that was down the middle is actually now, you know, right here in this example. And now you've got, you know, a much wider space. Makes it a lot easier to get to everything, and, you know, not a big pain in the butt. Does anybody have a blind corner cabinet? It looks something like this. Yeah, so the blind corner, it goes in and then it cuts over to the side, and it is like a little cave back there. And if you have small children that can go back there and fetch you stuff, that's great. But if you don't, or you don't feel like standing on your head and like getting your flashlight out and getting back there, it can be a really big pain in the butt. This particular example is one that we see a lot. You have there happens to be a little half shelf they have up here, but there is just so much space not being utilized in this cabinet. What we do is we have a solution. There's a couple solutions. So one is there's one that's called the Half Moon Lazy Susan that it kind of pivots and comes out. There's a couple things that can come out that are kind of off the shelf, and some of them can work better than others. It depends on the type of cabinets you have. This option I'll show you here works really well for the majority of our clients, which is it has a set of glide outs. So you see this one that comes out in the front here, and there's another one in the back that actually slides over to the side so that it becomes easier to get to this stuff here. And we do that on the top and the bottom. It's a great use of space because these are rectangular, so it uses all the space, but it still provides better accessibility than some of the other options. For corner cabinets, some of you have probably Lazy Susans. Who here has a Lazy Susan cabinet? Yes. Sometimes I've heard those called whirligigs, as well as spinning wheel of misfortune. If you have items that fall off the end of that because the lips aren't usually very, very tall, those can be very effective if you have larger items, lazy Susans. So larger items like pots or pans or big bowls and things like that, actually I think are best on a lazy Susan. So if you've got one of those and you're storing those types of items, you're pretty well doing as much as you can. If you have smaller items though, so for canned goods, sometimes people have like a little mini pantry in their corners, or smaller containers. This is what we call a glide around, and this is a combination of of glide out shelving, which is these pull out shelves, but the whole unit actually spins around, and so this here is the side of the unit that's in here, and there's two of these sides, one on this side, one on the other side, and it makes the most use of the corner cabinet for smaller items. And it may be a little hard to see kind of what's going on here. We have an example in our booth. I can tell you about that later. But this is a great option for those of you who really dislike your lazy Susans and you're having smaller items on there. Pantries are a big source of pain for a lot of folks. Can I get a raise of hands for people who have a pantry? All right, and how many people here are really happy with their pantries? All right, I got one over here, that's good. Obviously most of the time I'm seeing people that are not happy with their pantries, and the pantry is my favorite space because it's the most underutilized space. This is the most volume in one particular area of your kitchen area, if you will, and oftentimes they're mostly underutilized. So first I'm going to point out a few things in this cabinet, and you might be able to relate this to your space. So first of all, as I pointed out before, you see the wire shelving, right? So it's about the same distance apart on each of these shelves, which the builder who put this in doesn't know what you're storing, so it kind of makes sense, right? To have big enough spaces. These shelves, as you can see here, they don't actually go all the way to behind the door. So you see this little space from the end of the shelf to right where the door is, back here where the door would be. There's usually about 6 to 8 inches of space. And that shelf is usually about 14 to 16 inches. So that's like 50% more usable storage space you could gain in here simply by making these shelves deeper. That's like the first thing. And most people have stuff on the floor of their cabinet, of their pantry here, and so they're using the space there, but all these other shelves, they're not using that space. So that's the first thing to note. Okay, no problem. And then, again, this is a deep space, so you got items in the back, who knows what's back there. One picture I'll point out here as well, you've got this example of the stacking effect going on here. So as you see, you've got shorter items like canned goods that are just piled on top of each other here, right? And then maybe you've got some other snacks, you got smaller things that you're just trying to use that space because you only have this space, so you just start piling stuff on top of each other, all right? So the after, a properly designed space will, number one, will make these the full depth. So this right here is pushed all the way in, and you can see it comes right behind where the door is, so there's no wasted space. So that alone, you're adding about 50% more usable storage space. And then in between the shelves, you can see there's really very little dead space because we're trying to utilize as much as we can. So you can see we have some shorter spaces for shorter items. We've got some taller spaces for taller items. We're not completely segregating by height. Of course, you want to try to keep like things together still, but what we don't want to have is like one shelf that's all cans and then this one giant bottle, and you're wasting all the space or having to pile things on top of each other because of that. So this is a very efficiently designed space that's really accessible and uses the space really well. This is another pantry. It's just a double door style here. These were actually bifold doors. So how many people here have bifold doors in the pantry? Yeah, and they can be kind of a pain in the butt if you're opening them. And then when it folds up like this, you kind of end up with this thickness of the doors that it's a little bit in the way as well. And so in this case, we actually did a few things here. So one, we took those bifold doors and we actually braced them together. So this was a bifold door and we took it off the track. And then we braced it, so this acts as just a regular swing door now. And there's a little magnetic latch we put up here, so we access 2 swing doors now. So we've converted this to make it easier to use. Of course, that means you have to have enough space, so if you have like a really tight hallway, this might not work. But in this case, it worked really, really well. And then we designed the interior of the space for, you know, shorter items on the right side there. They had taller items that they wanted to put on the left. We ended up putting in a static shelf, just a regular shelf up at the top, so they could utilize more of the space up there as well. So it was much, much more efficient for them and easy to get to everything. This is a cabinet style pantry where, again, it's similar, it has 2 doors here. This is the before. You can see lots of wasted space, you know, in between. So lots of dead space here. Not a lot of stacking going on, which is good, but you know, there would be stacking if you ended up just piling stuff on top of each other. So here we can make this more efficient by putting in the glide out shelving and then really just getting the heights correct by laying them out based on the items that they want and to store in here. And then you can see we actually have more shelves in here than we do on the left side, and they're all spaced accordingly depending on the items that are in there. This is what has been effectively called the Harry Potter closet. No small children live in here, but we do have lots of random stuff that lives here on the floor and then on the side here. This is the space that's under the stairwell, and you can see the steps kind of going down here, going back. They had a small space on the side that was about 6 to 12 inches here on the side that they really didn't want to lose, but they wanted to do something with all this open space here. Like, what do we do with that? And because this stuff ends up on the floor here, and then they can't even walk into this space. So for these people, what we did was we put in a set of glide out shelves that started back into the space so they could walk in and then utilize this side space. And then each one of these gets progressively deeper as it goes down. So you can see, like at the top here, this was just a static shelf up here, this one here. This one goes back a little bit here, a couple feet, and this one goes back a little further, maybe another 6 inches and another 6 inches or whatever. And as the space goes down, they get deeper, so that we're using more of the space. We're using more of the space than we are here, and they're still easy to get to everything. Granted, the front of the space there still is a lot of space here that's not being used, but this was much, much better than what they had before, and they're very happy with it. Another pantry example is a corner pantry. Does anyone here have a pantry that's a kind of a drywall space like this that's in the corner of their space? Got one here. So this is very much very typical of what we see. You got static shelving around the perimeter, but you know, you can see that there's a ton of empty space in the front. This was a really bad one because there's only 4 shelves in here. I mean, that is not a lot of storage space, and each of these was only 12 to 14 inches deep. And so immediately, if you can see on the floor here, we actually made this a couple inches deeper, probably added 4 to 6 inches of depth to each of those. So we're adding that. We're able to make it much deeper. The problem with this space, typically, the reason why builders make these shelves so short is that the deeper that you make these shelves come out, the corner gets much, much more difficult to get into because that becomes really, really deep in the corner. So what we do is we combine the glide around, which is what I told you about earlier, that has the shelves that pull out and it spins around, and our glide out shelving, and so you can see here the after. These here, these all pull out and they spin around in the corner, and then all of these on the left and right here all pull out, so that we got her 150% more usable storage space in this pantry, which she just absolutely loved, and she filled this thing. Actually, she had empty space, was able to clear off all her countertops. She had food all over the counters and in other cabinets, and just put it all in here, and had extra space still to spare, which is awesome. The last pantry example I'm going to go through here is, this is a bigger pantry, a walk-in pantry. That was, it had, you know, a standard closet solution that was done like 15 years ago or 10 years ago or so. And same situation, you know, these shelves are only about, I think, 14 inches deep. Look at, this is what the floor ends up looking like. Inevitably, stuff just piles up on the floors. And, you know, it just is a pain to get to everything, but it's just the space isn't being utilized very effectively. So what we designed for this client is a series of glide outs. This is the exact same thing, or very close to it, of what I showed you before with the corner pantry. So it's a very similar design, except we added another bank of shelving here. And in this particular case, she had a lot of bigger appliances that didn't need pull-out shelves, so we just put the static shelving over there, and it came out just beautiful. So this is the same space, and the floor is clear here, nothing on the floor. Everything is put away, very organized. It's all custom built for this client. It's got the glide arounds in the corner here that spin around. Ended up using more of the vertical space up at the top for things like cookbooks and decorative items. And yeah, she loved it. This is that glide around I told you about earlier with a shelf that pulls out, and then this actually spins around like this as well. The next area we do a lot of is under sinks. So this could be in kitchens, it could be in bathrooms. We end up seeing just cleaning supplies all under sinks, and oftentimes in bathrooms we see shampoo bottles and other things, makeup and stuff like that, stuff to get ready during the day. The problem under sinks is that the plumbing, right? It's working around the plumbing, so oftentimes you don't have that shelving storage space up at the top because of the plumbing gets in the way. What we try to do is create solutions that work around the plumbing but still utilize the space. So here you can see we've got these risers that that go around the plumbing and allow you to use that upper space. And then the ones underneath go under the plumbing and get to all the stuff in the back of the cabinet. Those come in different configurations. Like this one here comes across the front because there's a pipe or disposal in the back. Oftentimes we'll also work with trash and recycling and compost. There's lots of different options for those, and it depends on your plumbing configuration what makes most sense, but I really like this one. This is one that I had done at my house, which has compost at the top because the compost bins are shorter, and then we have room underneath for storage of bags and other supplies that aren't used that often, and then a trash bag in the back. For bathrooms, as I mentioned, we do a lot of those. You can see the dead space at the top here and how we can utilize that upper space really, really effectively. And if there's enough space and the plumbing isn't in the way, we can actually put in a partition like this and actually put in a full bank of what become drawers to help organize the space and just utilize a lot more of that, and that these all come out independently of each other, which is really nice. So last example is a really cool one. We took a space that looked like that, and then we ended up decking it out with 5 glide outs, and this client was able to put all of her stuff back in and just really easily get to everything, which is really, really cool. Under sinks, sometimes the plumbing can be an issue, and you can see we can actually, another way to get around it is to actually put a notch in the box. So this one we actually have a notch. Sometimes we'll do angle cuts and all sorts of kind of tricky things, but we try to get you as much space as possible. And then we've got